This is the second verse from Deuteronomy, which is being explained phrase by phrase from verses from Exodus mostly. And we're up to the word, Vayitnu Aleinu. They put upon us avodah kosher, difficult work. As it says, they made the Jewish people work. Thank you very much. Beforach. Forach means great effort, great straining effort. I said last time, it is explained in one way, but perach with a soft mouth, because he instituted a day of national labor, which was semi-voluntary, and then the quotas were taken from the effort they made then, and then the Jews were kept on, and the others told to go home. There's another message here. Now, for those of you who know a little bit about Jewish thinking, I'll tell you the idea, and you tell me where it comes from. You tell me who you think the author of this idea is. Pei Reish Chaf can be associated through a coding mechanism called atbash with another word. Atbash means this. You associate the aleph with the tuf, the beis with the shin, the gimel with the reish, coming in from both ends. This is a coding that is mentioned in the Talmud. It is not something discovered with computers, about which I'm very skeptical. So if I find the associated letters for Pei, Reish, Chaf using the Atbash coding, so Pei is 6 from the end of the Aleph base, which means it's associated with the letter Vav. Reish is 3 from the end, which is associated with the letter Gimel. Chaf is 14 from the end. It's more than halfway. More than halfway from the end. So if you're coming this way, it turns out to be a Lamed. So now we have a Vav, a Gimel, and a Lamed. Now let's take the numerical values of those. A Vav is 6, a Gimel is 3, and a Lamed is 30. So now I have a Vav, a Gimel, and a Lamed. A Vav and Gimel is 9, and a Lamed is 30, for a total of 39. Here's the Vort. The Jews were made to work in Egypt with all 39 categories of labor that are forbidden on Shabbos, which were used in the building of the tabernacle. So first you do an Atbash coding, and then you do the Gematria. That's how you get to 39. And the Vort is that they were forced to do all 39 types of forbidden behavior. Not that it was forbidden for them, but it was for all 39 of those types of behavior in Egypt as slaves. Who would author such an idea? Where would that come from? So once you get into learning and you absorb some of the normal prejudices, you would say, oh, that must be a Hasidic book. After all, look at the hints, far out hints, Atbash coding and Gematria. The author of that remark is Tosfos. Tosfos in the last chapter of Psachim. You can't get more authoritative than Tosfos. So whatever prejudices you may have or hear, that's a word from Tosfos. And what it means is that the later historical development, when they constructed the tabernacle, and when Shabbos was instituted, so to speak, corresponding to what they did in the tabernacle, the message of the Vort, I believe, is, this not, Tosfos doesn't say explicitly, but I believe this is his point, that the very same work that you were forced to do as slaves to Pharaoh, you had an opportunity to elevate and dedicate to something holy when you were asked to make the tabernacle. And Shabbos is a cessation from that entire sum total of activity. So you have a triple connection made by this word, from the slavery in Egypt to the building of the tabernacle to Shabbos. Now comes a quotation of the whole verse from Deuteronomy. We cried out to Hashem, the God of our fathers. Hashem heard our voice. He saw our anyenu. I explained that as being impoverished. Veslam aleinu, and our great efforts. Veslachatzenu, and the pressure Lachatz is pressure. A person's under pressure. He's nervous. That was placed upon us. So now, got to go through phrase by phrase. We cried out to Hashem, the God of our ancestors, as it says, as it was those great days, those many days. The king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed because of the slavery, and they cried out. And their cry rose to Elohim, to God, from the work. Now, there are two secrets here on the surface, but this is already Chazal pointed out. What do you mean the king of Egypt died and they sighed and cried out? What's one thing got to do with the other? The answer to that is ancient Egypt was like contemporary North Korea. The leader is the leader. He's semi-divine. He's great. Everything he does is wonderful. All big successes. The only time you could cry is when the leader dies. Then, of course, it sounds like you're crying because the leader died. That's fine. You can understand that. The only time the Jews could cry is when the Pharaoh of Egypt died, and the Egyptians were mourning the death of the Pharaoh, so the Jews could cry without arousing suspicion about why they were crying. The Gaon of Vilna has here a extremely fundamental idea. It says twice is because of the work. They cried out because of the work. If you look at the book of Exodus, in the beginning where it describes the Exodus, it says over and over again that God took us out of Egypt because he promised our ancestors. When Moses says to God, God sends him down to take the Jewish people out, and Moses says to God, what have they done to deserve this? What merit do they have? God says, when they leave Egypt, they will serve me on this mountain. They will receive the Torah here, meaning they don't have any merit. They don't deserve to be freed. My freeing them is an investment in their future, not because of anything they did in the past. So, there's a promise to the patriarchs, there's a projection for the future, but it's not because of them. You could ask, they were enslaved for 90 years. What took so long? Why did God take them out 40 years before? The answer is that you're thinking in terms of God's responding to them because of what they deserve. The answer is, they don't deserve anything. And indeed, after the plagues start, and there are 8 plagues, 80% still don't go out. 80% die in the days of darkness because they're not ready to go out even after 8 plagues. And the 9th plague, the plague of darkness, they die. Says the Gaon of Vilna, the promise to the patriarchs does not mean that every person who shares genes with the patriarchs is going to be rescued. The promise to the patriarchs doesn't apply to every Jew who has their genes. Indeed, after they leave, and they rebel against God twice God says to Moses, I'm going to wipe them out. And if you protest, what about the promise to the patriarchs? God says, I'll make a new nation out of you. You, Moses. They'll all be lost, and you will be saved, and you'll make a new nation. After all, you come from the patriarchs, so I'll keep my promise to the patriarchs just through you. So the promise to the patriarchs does not mean that if you have Jewish genes, you're automatically going to be favored or you're automatically going to be saved. So, I'm now explaining the Gaon of Vilna as best I understand him. So, the Gaon of Vilna says, you look at contemporary people and you ask, does the promise to the patriarchs apply to them or not? It depends on who they are. When a person, a contemporary, when God looks at the world and sees them, do they see the patriarchs in these people? Are these people a continuation of the patriarchs? Do they believe in the patriarchs? Do they believe in what they stood for? Do they want to continue it and develop it in the world? If so, then the promise of the patriarchs applies to them. And if not, not. And here, God set up a test. God caused the oppression to become very, very severe, which means that they were bitterly suffering. What will they do with that? Set up communist cells to overthrow the government? Or try to break through the walls and escape? What are they going to do with this pain? Answer, they cried out to God. They cried out to God, and that shows that they're already related to the original covenant with the patriarchs. Which God are they crying to? The God that they know from the patriarchs. So at least those who did this now are relevant, and they can be the recipients of the promise to the patriarchs. God caused the oppression to become bitter so that they'll cry out, so that they'll be connected to the promise, so that they could be saved. And it's a good example of how little we understand what's going on in the world or in the Jewish community or to each of us as individuals, how little we understand. We think things are going badly. We think we're suffering. We think we suffer losses. And we think, I've been pretty good. Why isn't God doing it? There are always calculations behind the scenes, and they are always designed for our good individually and collectively, and we are often ignorant of what those calculations are. This is a good example of how those calculations work. Now, you had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to say something maybe a bit like, that might sound bad, but I mean, even today we don't, I feel like we're very, very close to just based on what the world is going like and based on what some doing saying we're close to Mashiach and stuff like that. But I don't see that we deserve it as a whole, as a Jewish nation, as bad as it sounds
It's a long and complicated subject. The most important single thing you have to take into account is God doesn't expect from anyone more than they can be reasonably thought capable of doing. So you're looking at the outer performance. You don't know what our capabilities are. And you certainly don't know what our capabilities are compared to others or compared to different times in history. The objection of the critics, childish, foolish objection of the critics is, if you thought that God is running the world, why is it that the Holocaust hit the Jews in Europe and didn't hit the Jews in America? The Jews in America were much worse than the Jews in Europe. Well, if you look externally at their performance, there's no question that the Jews' performance in America was much lower than the performance in Europe. But who were the Jews in America? Where did they come from? They came from Europe, and they were the least connected, least educated, least dedicated Jews of Europe. The better Jews in Europe stayed. They didn't come. How many threw over their children on the boat and came off and said, forget it, it's over? How many withstood the challenge of working 6 days a week? You lose your job at the end of every week. The vast majority gave up Shabbos right away. So you look at them and say, their performance is worse than the performance of Jews in Europe? Sure, it was worse. Who were they? They were the lowest possible level of the Jews in Europe. What do you expect from them? So you can't tell by looking externally at their performance how God judges them. That's a very, very important fundamental principle.
Just on the Passover, I'm not running time. Rashi says that the king got Zerah. Could that still work with the North Korea analogy, or would you say that Rashi's just like that?
No, I think it will work. If the king is desperately ill, it will be understood that the Egyptians will cry, and when the Egyptians are crying and wailing and praying for him because he does good for them, they like it, so the Jews can cry also. I think it doesn't make Rashi doesn't make any difference there in terms of this pshat. Vayishma Hashem es koleinu. Hashem heard our voice, as it says. Oh, and here it is. This next verse proves what the Gottlieb said. I just forgot that it was here. Hashem heard their cry, and He remembered the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, what's one thing got to do with the other? He heard their cry, and He remembered the covenant. If I were writing it, which of course would be idiotic, I would write, he heard their cry and saw their suffering and had pity on them and felt that they suffered enough and so on. No, he heard their cry and remembered the covenant. Says the Gaon of Vilna, that's what it's teaching you. Their crying made them relevant to the covenant. Had they not cried, they wouldn't have been relevant to the covenant. Es al amalenu, elu habonim. It's a very interesting idea now. The word amal means effort, but as you'll see, it has a special connotation. These are the sons, from as the verse says, all the newborn male babies should be drowned, and the daughters can be kept alive. The word amal very often means effort that doesn't produce results. It's a special word for effort that doesn't produce results. So, for example, when you finish a tractate of the Talmud, there's a long, there was a celebration, and then there's a long recital of a certain text. And in the middle of that recital, it's comparing us to others who are not scholars, and it says, "Anu amelim v'hem amelim." We make effort, and they make effort. "Anu amelim v'kabel schar, v'hem amelim en mekabel schar." We make effort and receive reward for it. They make an effort and don't receive a reward for it. So the Chafetz Chaim asked, how are we supposed to understand this? Non-scholars work. Let's take a shoemaker. He makes shoes. He makes shoes. He gets paid for the shoes. What do you mean they make an effort and don't receive a reward? So Chafetz Chaim explained as follows. In those days, it wasn't like today. You go into a shoe store and there are 400 pairs of shoes. You pick out the size, the style, Those days, you went to the shoemaker. He measured your foot. And then he made you a shoe for your foot. So you go in, you order the shoes, he measures your foot. 2 weeks later, you come back, and the shoes don't fit. Do you pay him? No, you do not. You only pay for a product that works. You don't pay for a mistake. So he made effort, and he didn't get rewarded. What's the comparison in our case? We're learning Gemara, and we're struggling, and we're trying to understand the commentaries, and we fail. We don't understand them. We don't get it. Do we get paid? Yes, we do. Because we get paid for occupying ourselves with Torah. Not for succeeding in understanding, but occupying ourselves with studying, with learning Torah. That's not true for the commercial efforts. Commercial efforts, you only get paid for success. You don't get paid for your efforts. So that's the idea. Amal is where you make effort and you don't achieve the results. And that is why I think the Haggadah here says Amal refers specifically to the male children who, after birth, were drowned. It means going through pregnancy and birth was effort that had no results, no fruit. Lachatz and trak mean roughly the same thing, pressure. As it says, when we say lachatz, it's the same word, lachatz. What the concept is, I don't really understand. Now comes the next verse. Vayotzienu Hashem Mitzrayim. God took us out of Egypt, biyad chazaka, with a strong hand, an outstretched arm, moragodol, great awe, awesome events that produce awe. Osos and mosim, signs and wonders of various kinds. Now, the Haggadah doesn't go through this in detail. I just want to make a remark here about a general remark. God's strong hand. What's the idea? God has a strong hand. Gibor, God is called Gibor, which sometimes is translated as mighty. What's the idea of associating strength with God?
Does God have emotions?
Officially not. Officially not. He presents himself to us as if he did, and that's a whole story as to how he does that. But in an ultimate reality, not. So it's a very tricky subject. I can't go into it in detail now. What is strength? What is strength? Strength is the ability to overcome resistance. You're pushing against something, and you can overcome it. So to call God strong indicates that we're thinking of some kind of resistance, and then we're saying, no, God is strong enough to overcome that resistance. What kind of resistance would be relevant to God? You say, oh, listen, there is this resistance, but God's strong, he overcomes it. Excuse me, he's the creator of the universe. What's the problem? The galaxies are revolting? I mean, who cares? Who cares? He creates the whole thing. The only resistance to God that could possibly be relevant is if it's internal resistance. If he's resisting himself. How could that be? The answer is, this is based on the framework of the Kabbalah, but really it's in the Talmud and the Midrash also, just have to know how to read it. From our point of view, what God is beyond us entirely. We don't talk about that. We're not competent to talk about it or think about it. All we know is that God acts in certain ways in dealing with the world. And there are various different ways in which he acts, at least that's what's presented to us. And the ways in which he acts can come in conflict with one another. One of the ways that he acts is chesed, loving kindness, freely giving because he's a giver. Not because we've earned it or deserve it, but because he's a giver. That's one of the ways that he acts. Another way that he acts is justice. If you've earned it, you get it. If you haven't earned it, you don't get it. And there's an interplay between these two different ways of dealing with the world. And you can very well imagine there will be circumstances under which free giving says one thing and justice says something else. And they are in conflict with one another. And then when one characteristic overrides, is stronger than the other characteristic and expresses itself, that is where strength is used. Usually, strength, although it can work both ways, but usually strength means withholding. God's primary purpose is to give, and something has to stop that. Otherwise, the giving will be without limit, without any boundaries. So the characteristic of justice says, not that much, not now, not in that way. Hold it back because of the ultimate goal. Sometimes the attribute of justice says they've gone over the red line, they don't deserve anything. Even the attribute of justice may say, let them be destroyed. Then the quality of giving overrides that. Strength refers to God as one aspect of God's activity overcoming the other aspect of God's activity. And that's certainly what happened here, because in this case, the attribute of justice said, you're saving the Jews, they don't deserve it. They really don't deserve it. Twice, the attribute of justice said to God, they're all idol worshippers. The vast majority of Jews were also idol worshippers. Why are you destroying these and saving those? So the strength here is usually referred to as his hand, this is right hand, which is the hand of loving kindness. That's the strength that's being referred to here. Okay, now the Haggadah explains. God took us out from Egypt, not via various different types of angels, not via an agent acting on his behalf, Kodesh Baruch Hu himself, with his honor and his own essence, he was there to engineer the exodus from Egypt. Shinemar, God says, I will pass over, or pass through. We'll talk about Passover in a little while, Miss Hashem. I'll pass through Egypt on this night. I will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt. I don't have people to animals. I will do judgments. Ani Hashem. So each one of the singular pronouns, or the singular verbs, the Haggadah explains. Vavarti, I will pass through. Ani velo malach. Vikesi, I will strike every firstborn. Ani velo saraf. I will do judgments against the Egyptian gods. Ani velo shliach. Ani Hashem, I am Hashem. Ani hu velo acher. None other. Now, contrary to the way the words sound on the surface, I want you to know that there are those who picture this as God together with a whole retinue of angels who carry out the various parts of this activity. And you'll see when we talk about the word Pesach that will be crucial. So what it means is this: usually, so to speak, God runs the world from afar. He sends various types of angels. He sends agents to carry out what needs to be done. And he is, in essence, distant. This time, he didn't maintain his distance. He came, but doesn't mean he came alone. Doesn't mean he came alone. Doesn't mean that he personally did all of these things. It just means that he didn't send the messengers from afar. He personally attended and accompanied. And it's in part an important idea because Ramchal stresses this in the Das Tfunos. When Moses says to Pharaoh, you want the plague to stop? Okay. I'm warning you, if you have to let them go, I'll let the plague stop. I'll pray to God that the plague should stop. There's a footnote on a footnote. By the way, nowhere does God say anything about the stopping of the plagues. Nowhere. God says there's going to be a plague, and go and tell them there's going to be a plague, and do a symbolic action, and it starts. Nowhere does he say anything about stopping. The stopping is always because Moses prays for it. God doesn't tell Moses it's going to be a seven-day plague. It only stops because Moses prays for it. Okay, and Moses says to Pharaoh, I will leave the city, I will pray to God. I'll leave the city and pray to God. So the commentators say, why not pray where you are? Answer, because Egypt was full of idols. Moses felt that, and he was right, of course, I shouldn't say felt as if it was a mistake. Moses understood that it was wrong to pray with the presence of so many idols. It could be that prayers are mediated by angels, and the angels don't appear under those circumstances. There could be a thought that it was so defiled, the place was so degraded, that it excludes any appearance of something holy there. That's why Moses exits. That's why an angel won't appear there. And then the false thought would be, okay, if Moses can't pray there and an angel can't appear there, surely God, who's the Holy of Holies, isn't, can't, won't appear there, off limits? No. None of these rules bind God. There are no limits to where God can appear, and God comes right in front of the idols, right in front of the tumah, right in front of the degradation. He's there. There are no limits to what God can do. There can be limits to his agents. There can be limits to angels, but there's no limits to what God can do. So God goes in and says, no. For me, these things are not limitations. I'm the creator beyond all limitations of that kind. And by the way, the same thing is said about his relationship to the Jewish people. Hashochein b'socham, I think it is. B'soch tumasam. I am there with them when they're tummy, when they're defiled. I'm there with them anyway. That can't stop. So that's a very important element here of the fact that he's doing it without any limitations. It says, Biad chazaka, with a strong hand, zohar dever. These are word associations, and I don't have anything more to say about them. It's the cattle sickness. It describes God's hand applied to the cattle, the animal, livestock. There's Dever Kovimod, a very serious animal disease. So on a 2-year outstretched arm, this is very, I don't have a shot in it, but I'll just tell you what it says. This is the sword, as it says, describing God. God's sword is outstretched in his hand over Yerushalayim. This is not a verse from Exodus. This is describing much later in history where God is threatening Yerushalayim with destruction. This is very unique. All the other verses that are taken to explain are taken from the book of Exodus, and they're all positive. This is something that's negative. So it's very noteworthy that Haggadah puts this in here. When I tell you I don't know, it's because I just haven't looked it up. It wasn't something that I focused on. There are definitely explanations, I just don't know it. Mora Godel, great awesomeness, Zugilu Shechina. Awe means being conscious of something that's overwhelmingly great. Overwhelmingly great, and in the presence of that, I'm nothing. I'm infinitesimal. I have no existence. That means HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence, so to speak, the Gilui Shechina. As the verse says, "Oh, Hanisa Elokim lavo lekach goy mikar goy." It's again the association of the word yad, as Hashem did in front of your eyes. Now here, the verse refers to a situation which I think it's the Gemara, the Medrash comments on. Goy mikarav goy, a nation from the inside another nation, from the inside of another nation. The Chazal liken this to birth. It's as if the Jewish people are in the womb of Egypt. Notice, the fetus in the womb is being nourished by the mother. Being nourished by the mother. This isn't just physically encircled, physically enclosed. It means that we were getting our sustenance from Egypt. That was a terribly polluting circumstance. The birth here was creating a new identity. We spoke about this when we talk about Pesach, the mouth speaks. We spoke earlier at the beginning of the Haggadah. This was a transformation of identity, a transformation of essence and identification. That's what's indicated by the phrase "Goy mikerav goy." Osos, signs, which is the mata. Again, the mata, the staff. The verse says that's what you do the osos with. Mofsim is wonders. Zehadam. The verse says, I placed Mofsim in the heavens and the earth. It's not exactly obvious why the word Mofsim would be referring to Dam in particular. There is an idea here. The plagues break up into two types. 4 of the plagues break nature, and 6 of the plagues show that nature itself can express the will of the Creator. They're all miracles, but they're different kinds of miracles, fundamentally different kinds of miracles. So, the first and the last 3 break nature. Water doesn't turn to blood, period. Hailstones don't have fire inside them. Darkness does not continue for several days and trap people so they become immobile. And there is no medical condition known to science that strikes down firstborn children. There is no such thing. Those 4 utterly break nature. They're anti-natural events. The other 6 are not like that at all. The other 6 take natural processes and focus them and increase them, and they start when Moses says they're going to start, and they end when Moses says they're going to end. It's clearly miraculous, but it's a miraculous use of nature. Not breaking nature, but using nature. So the frogs. When Egypt was inundated with frogs, where did the frogs come from? The Torah is explicitly came from the river. That's where frogs breed. They breed in the river. That's where they always come from. Wouldn't that have been more spectacular if the frogs had fallen from the heavens or grown out of flower pots? Yes, it would have been more spectacular. It wouldn't have the same message. The message here is that God uses nature. Not that he breaks nature, but uses nature. Of course, he can do both. It's very important to teach that he can use nature. So mofes as a word would refer to breaking nature, not using nature. The first one of the plagues was one of the ones that break nature. So one can explain why the dam, the blood, is associated with the word mofes because of that connotation. Now, this is part of the verse that's being quoted here. Dam, va'esh, v'simos ashad. 3 types of destructive forces. And, as the Haggadah points out, many have the custom of pulling out a few drops of wine at this point. And again, on the next page, we go through all 10 plagues. Again, drops of wine are pulled out. And when Yehuda gives the acronyms, drops of wine are pulled out as well, and then the cup is immediately refilled. Why are we pulling out drops of wine? Here is a fundamental idea that we do not, I have to say this carefully, we do not fundamentally celebrate the destruction of our enemies. What we celebrate is our salvation. Now, I use the word celebrate advisedly. That means having a holiday, having a performance to celebrate. We celebrate the relief that we have from our enemies, not the destruction of the enemies. This point is made by the Meshech Chochmah where he points out that Pesach as a holiday has an official holiday at the beginning and the end, the first day and the seventh day, and in between days, just like Sukkot does. That whole structure, 1 and 7 as holidays with the intermediary days, was commanded in Egypt already, before we left. The seventh day of Pesach is the day on which the Red Sea was split, the Jews were saved, and the Egyptians were destroyed. Says the Meshech Chochmah, the reason why the 7th of Pesach was declared as a holiday in Egypt is so we shouldn't think that what we're celebrating is the anniversary of destroying the Egyptians. We shouldn't think that. Because the holiday was commanded before the Egyptians were destroyed. And he says, if you look into Megillah Esther, you'll see this theme over and over again, because the days that we celebrate in Purim, the 14th of Adar everywhere else, and the 15th of Adar in walled cities in Shushan, the Megillah says several times, Yom Asher Nochu Bo HaYehudim, the day on which the Jews had relief. Not the days that we destroyed our enemies, because those days were the 13th everywhere, and the 13th and 14th in Shushan. So we don't celebrate the destruction. Here, because the Egyptians were destroyed in the process of freeing us, there's a certain reduction. Drops of wine are spilled out to recognize that there was some loss here in the destruction of the Egyptians.